Single dad risked his life to save a dying stranger. Unaware she's his millionaire's daughter. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was just another ordinary afternoon for Ethan, a 36-year-old single father who worked 2 jobs to provide for his little boy. The sun had begun to sink, painting the sky above the small town in shades of orange and gold. Ethan was driving home from the construction site, his son's worn backpack tossed on the passenger seat beside him, ready to be filled with tomorrow's school assignments. Life was heavy, but he carried it with quiet endurance. He had grown used to the calluses on his hands, the aching in his back, and the whispers of neighbors who pitied him for raising a child alone. As Ethan pulled onto the old bridge that stretched across the river, he slowed down. The traffic ahead looked strange. Cars stopped, hazard lights flashing. Then he saw it. Smoke rising, screams echoing through the crisp air. His chest tightened when he realized what had happened. A black sedan had lost control, crashed against the guardrail, and was now teetering dangerously, half of it already leaning over the rushing water below. He stopped his truck and jumped out before even thinking. Other drivers stood frozen at a distance, their cell phones raised but their feet rooted to the asphalt. "Call 911!" Ethan shouted, sprinting toward the chaos. Through the cracked windshield he caught sight of her. A young woman, her face pale, struggling against the seatbelt that had locked her in place. Her lips moved, but no sound carried out. The car shifted again, groaning as metal scraped against metal. The crowd gasped, yet no one moved closer. Without hesitation, Ethan climbed onto the damaged guardrail, his boots slipping slightly against the steel. The wind whipped across the bridge, tugging at his jacket, but he pressed forward. One wrong step, and both of them could plunge into the icy current. "Hang on! I'm coming to get you!" he yelled, his voice rough but steady. Her eyes widened at the sight of him. For a brief moment, their gazes locked. Fear met determination. He forced the door open with all the strength left in his arms, the hinges screaming in protest. Glass shattered beneath his elbow as he reached in, cutting his skin but not caring. The smell of gasoline filled the air. "Stay with me, do not close your eyes," he urged. She tried to speak, her voice trembling. "Please, I cannot move." "I will get you out," he promised, his tone sharp with resolve. He yanked at the seatbelt, but it refused to budge. Digging into his pocket, he pulled out the utility knife he always carried for work. With one swift motion, he sliced the belt free. The car lurched violently, tilting further over the edge, but Ethan grabbed her just in time, pulling her toward him. The weight of her body nearly dragged him down, but he steadied himself against the frame, teeth clenched. His muscles screamed as he lifted her, step by step, inch by inch, away from the crumpling vehicle. Behind him, someone shouted that the car was going to fall. He ignored it. Finally, with a desperate surge, Ethan carried her back onto solid ground. The sedan slipped, crashed, and vanished into the roaring water below. Silence swept over the crowd before a wave of voices erupted, filled with disbelief and awe. The woman clung to him weakly, her breath shallow, her pulse faint against his chest. Ethan laid her down gently on the asphalt, brushing broken glass from her hair. His son, who had run from the truck to find him, pressed a half-empty water bottle into his father's hand. Ethan tilted it carefully against her lips. Her trembling fingers clutched at his sleeve, eyes glistening with something more than fear, something like gratitude. And in that fleeting moment, Ethan did not wonder who she was, or where she came from. To him, she was simply a life worth saving. He did not know yet that this stranger carried a secret one that would soon turn his entire world upside down. The woman's breaths came shallow, her chest rising and falling with effort as Ethan crouched beside her. The rush of the river below, and the echo of the fallen car, still thundered in the air. But all Ethan could focus on was the fragile life lying in front of him. Her skin was cold to the touch, her pulse weak beneath his calloused fingers. "Stay with me, do you hear me?" Ethan urged, tilting her face gently so she would not slip into unconsciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then fixing on him with a faint flicker of recognition. I cannot breathe," she whispered, her voice raw and broken. "You can," Ethan said firmly. "Just keep trying. You are safe now." He shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her trembling body, shielding her from the biting wind that whipped across the bridge. Beside him, his son crouched low, wide-eyed but brave, holding onto his father's arm. "Dad, is she going to be okay?" the boy asked in a trembling voice. Ethan forced a steady tone, though worry gnawed at him. "She will be, buddy. She has to be." From the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed something glinting near the wreckage. A delicate silver pendant lay half hidden in the shards of glass, its chain tangled and broken. He picked it up quickly before anyone could step on it and slipped it into his pocket, meaning to return it later. At that moment, it was just an object, but it carried a weight he did not yet understand. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as emergency vehicles sped toward them. Other drivers, who had stood frozen only minutes ago, now gathered closer, whispering in disbelief. A few recorded on their phones, their voices rising with a mix of admiration and shock. "That man just saved her life. He almost fell in himself." The young woman stirred, her voice faint. Why did you help me?" Ethan leaned closer, brushing glass from her cheek with gentle fingers. "Because you needed someone. That is reason enough." Her lips curved in the slightest hint of a smile before her eyes rolled back, and she went limp again. Panic surged through Ethan's chest. He pressed his hand against her wrist, desperate to feel a pulse. It was there, but fading. "Stay with me," he begged under his breath, his voice breaking for the first time. He lifted her carefully into his arms again, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When the paramedics arrived, they rushed forward with a stretcher, barking instructions. Ethan laid her down reluctantly, his rough hands lingering at her side until they guided him back. The flashing red and blue lights painted the scene in harsh colors, illuminating the blood on his arm, the dirt smeared across his face. "Sir, you need medical attention too," one of the medics insisted. "I am fine," Ethan replied, his eyes locked on the woman as they fitted an oxygen mask over her face. "Just take care of her." As they lifted her onto the ambulance, her hand slipped free, falling loosely by her side. Ethan's little boy darted forward, catching it for just a second, whispering, "You will be okay, lady." The doors slammed shut, and the ambulance sped away, its siren wailing into the night. Ethan stood frozen, his heart pounding, his son's small hand gripping his own. He had no idea who she was, no clue that his act of courage had just tied his life to hers in a way that neither of them could escape. And somewhere deep in his pocket, the silver pendant pressed against his leg, a silent reminder of the secret that was about to unravel. The night air carried the echo of the ambulance siren long after it disappeared down the road. Ethan stood still, his son's small hand wrapped tightly in his own, both of them staring at the empty stretch of highway, as though the young woman's fragile presence still lingered there. The adrenaline that had fueled his body moments earlier drained away, leaving only exhaustion, a sting in his bleeding arm, and an ache in his chest he could not explain. Back inside the truck, his son shifted in the seat, eyes still wide. "Dad, was she really going to die?" Ethan started the engine, the rumble filling the silence. "She might have, but she did not. That is what matters." He forced a smile, ruffling the boy's hair, though the truth was heavier. He had seen too much fear in her eyes, too much fragility in the way she had clung to him. He knew the memory would stay with him. Hours later, at home, the weight of the night pressed harder. Ethan cleaned the blood from his arm and wrapped it with the same practical care he applied to everything in his life. He did not think of hospitals for himself. His son needed him healthy, and money was too tight for luxuries like stitches. On the kitchen table, he placed the silver pendant he had slipped from the asphalt. Under the warm glow of the single overhead bulb, it caught the light, revealing an engraving along its edge. He traced the letters with a calloused thumb but stopped before reading them aloud. It felt too personal, like trespassing on a stranger's secret. With a sigh, he closed his fist around it and tucked it into a drawer, meaning to give it back if fate allowed. The following morning brought no rest. Ethan woke before dawn, prepared breakfast, and packed his son's lunch with the precision of a man who knew time was never enough. As the boys' school bus pulled away, Ethan stood at the curb, watching until it disappeared. His thoughts drifted back to the bridge, to the cold river below, to the pale young woman's trembling fingers against his sleeve. "Why did you help me?" she had asked. Her voice echoed in his head, stirring something he could not shake. He had no answer beyond the truth because she needed him. Later that week, he passed the local diner where he often grabbed cheap coffee before heading to work. The television above the counter flickered with a news broadcast. A polished anchor spoke in her sharp tone. And there on the screen was the wreckage from the bridge. The headline scrolled across the bottom. "Heiress in critical condition after near-fatal crash." Ethan's hand froze around the mug. "Heiress?" The word struck him like a blow. The reporter continued. "Sources confirm the young woman rescued from the river accident is the only daughter of renowned business magnate Richard Caldwell. She remains hospitalized, but doctors say her condition is stabilizing thanks to a brave bystander who pulled her from the wreck moments before it plunged into the water." The diner erupted in murmurs. Patrons exchanged theories about wealth, power, and the mystery savior who had risked his life. Ethan lowered his head, his heart hammering. He had not given his name. He had walked away once she was in the ambulance. And now, she was no longer just a stranger. She was part of a world entirely separate from his own, a world of wealth and privilege he had never touched. As he left the diner, the pendant weighed heavier in his pocket, almost burning with significance. He thought of her again, her frightened eyes, her faint smile, and for the first time, fear twisted inside him. Not fear of what he had done, but of what it meant. Back at home, his son greeted him at the door, clutching a crayon drawing from school. The picture was simple: stick figures on a bridge, one pulling the other from danger, with a bright sun above. "That is you, Dad," the boy said proudly. "You are a hero." Ethan knelt down, hugging his son tightly, his throat tight with emotion. He wanted to believe those words, but something told him that being a hero was about to cost more than he had ever imagined. And somewhere across town, in a sterile hospital room surrounded by machines and hushed voices, the heiress opened her eyes again. The first face she searched for was not her father's, nor the doctor's. It was the man who had held her against the storm and promised she would live. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic, its walls painted in muted shades meant to calm the restless. But nothing about the place felt calm to Claire Caldwell. She shifted slowly against the pillows, her ribs aching from the accident, her mind replaying the crash in fragments. Broken glass, screeching metal, the terrifying tilt of the car as it hung over the river. And then his face. The rough hands that pulled her free. The steady voice that told her she would live. Her father's presence filled the room like a shadow. Richard Caldwell, a man whose empire stretched across the country, stood stiff near the window, his tailored suit unwrinkled even in the early hours. "You are lucky," he said, his tone more businesslike than paternal. "The doctors say you will recover fully." Claire nodded faintly, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere. "The man who saved me, has anyone found him?" Richard's brow furrowed. "He was a bystander. The police are looking, but do not concern yourself. You need rest." "Oh, I want to thank him," Claire insisted, her voice soft but firm. "I would not be here if it were not for him." Richard turned away, his jaw tight. "If he comes forward, our people will handle it. But men like that often seek attention. They imagine their good deed entitles them to rewards they never earned." Claire flinched at the coldness in his words. "You do not know him." "And you do?" Richard asked sharply. "You were unconscious most of the time." "Oak." She fell silent, but her heart argued in her chest. She did know him, in a way. She remembered his eyes, the strength in his arms, the way he spoke, not like a man chasing recognition, but like a man who believed her life mattered. Far across town, Ethan pushed through another long day at the construction site. The cold air bit at his skin, but he worked with a steady rhythm, trying to bury his thoughts beneath the weight of bricks and mortar. At lunch, his coworkers joked about the heiress on the news, laughing at the idea of her fortune. "Can you imagine being the guy who saved her?" one of them said. "He should cash in. Marry her, maybe. Lifetime of free rides." Ethan forced a smile but stayed quiet. He had no intention of stepping into her world. He was a single father who barely managed the bills each month. That was reality. Whatever connection he felt that night, had been just a passing moment. Yet fate seemed unwilling to let go. A black car appeared outside the construction site near the end of his shift. Two men in suits stepped out, scanning the workers until their eyes landed on him. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, uneasy under their gaze. "Ethan Walker?" one asked. He nodded slowly. "You need to come with us." The foreman frowned. "What is this about?" The men ignored the question. The Caldwell family would like a word. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered the pendant tucked away at home, the one that had slipped from her that night. He had thought about returning it quietly, maybe mailing it, but now it seemed the choice had been taken from him. At the hospital, Claire sat upright when she heard the door open. Her heart quickened as she saw him step inside, dirt still clinging to his boots, his flannel shirt marked by a day's hard labor. The sight was jarring in the sterile luxury of the private suite. But to her, it felt real, grounding. "You," she whispered, her eyes filling. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the floor. "I just wanted to see if you were all right." Her father rose immediately, his expression sharp. "So you are the man. Let us be clear. Whatever you are expecting money, favors, this is not how our family operates." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he did not answer. He had not come for that. Claire cut in, her voice trembling but firm. "Father, stop. He saved my life. I would not be here if not for him." The tension in the room was thick, the clash of two worlds colliding. Ethan felt it pressing down on him, the invisible line drawn between wealth and poverty. He looked at Claire once more, her fragile smile reaching for him across the distance, and then turned to leave. But before he reached the door, she called out softly, "Please, do not go yet." Then, and just like that, Ethan realized the story was far from over. Ethan froze near the door, the quiet plea in Claire's voice holding him in place. For a moment, he thought about ignoring it, about walking out of the sterile white room and never looking back. But something in her tone, fragile yet insistent, pulled at him. Slowly, he turned, meeting her gaze once more. Claire lifted her hand, motioning for him to come closer. Her face was pale, her movements weak, but her eyes burned with determination. "You risked everything for me," she said, her voice low but steady. "I need to know your name." "It is Ethan Walker," he replied, his voice rough from the weight of the moment. "Ethan," she repeated softly, almost like a vow. "I will not forget that." Richard Caldwell, still standing like a sentinel by the window, scoffed quietly. "You are still recovering, Claire. Do not let emotions cloud your judgment. Gratitude is one thing, but this man is not part of our world." Ethan clenched his fists at his sides, the words stinging even though he had expected them. He had lived long enough to recognize the tone of dismissal, the sound of doors slammed shut by wealth and pride. "I am not here for your world," Ethan said evenly. "I did what anyone should do, that is all." But Claire shook her head. "Not everyone would have done what you did. They all stood back. You were the only one who stepped forward." Her voice broke slightly, filled with something Ethan could not name: gratitude. Admiration, maybe even the beginning of trust. Richard exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. "Enough. The doctors want her resting, not entertaining fantasies. You have had your moment, Mr. Walker. It would be best if you left now." Ethan glanced at Claire one last time. Her hand lingered in the air, as though reaching for him even as her father's authority pressed between them. With a quiet nod, Ethan turned and walked out of the room, the sound of the door clicking shut behind him, echoing louder than it should have. Down in the parking lot, the evening air felt heavy. Ethan drew in a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He knew he had crossed into a world where he did not belong, a world where every glance and word reminded him of the gulf between them. And yet, despite the sting of rejection, he could not erase the image of Claire's eyes following him as he left. That night, Ethan placed the silver pendant on the kitchen table once again. He stared at it for a long time, the engraved initials catching the dim light. He had meant to return it earlier, but now it carried a weight that was harder to release. His son padded into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, are you thinking about the lady again?" Ethan forced a smile. "Just a little, buddy. Now, back to bed." As the boy shuffled away, Ethan closed his fist around the pendant. He told himself he would find a way to return it soon, quietly, without stirring more trouble. But deep down, He knew the story was not finished. And in her hospital bed, Claire whispered his name once more into the quiet room. Ethan. It was not just gratitude anymore. It was a thread that bound her to the man her father wanted her to forget. The days that followed blurred together, but neither Ethan nor Claire could shake the memory of that night. For Ethan, it was a memory he tried to bury beneath the weight of daily survival, early mornings, long shifts at the construction site, and evenings spent helping his son with homework at the worn kitchen table. For Claire, it was the memory that kept her awake in the sterile silence of the hospital. The memory of the man who carried her from death to life. Claire waited until her father stepped out for a business call before making her move. With slow, determined effort, she rose from the hospital bed and reached for the cardigan folded across the chair. Her body ached, her legs unsteady, but her resolve was sharper than ever. She could not stay confined, silenced, and told whom to trust. She needed to see him again, not in a hospital room under her father's glare, but in his world, on his terms. The following afternoon, Ethan was working a shift downtown, hauling lumber from a delivery truck, when he noticed a figure standing at the edge of the site. The sunlight caught her hair, the wind tugged gently at her cardigan. He froze mid-step, his breath catching in his throat. It was her. "Claire?" he whispered under his breath, almost convinced his mind had conjured the vision. She smiled faintly, though the effort of standing showed in her posture. "You did not think I would let you disappear, did you?" Ethan set the lumber down carefully and walked toward her, his boots crunching on gravel. "You should not be here. You are supposed to be resting." "I am tired of resting," she admitted. "I am tired of being told what I can and cannot do. I wanted to thank you again without an audience, without anyone twisting it into something it is not." Her words carried a sincerity that reached past the invisible barriers between them. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, uneasy with the curious stares of his coworkers. "This is not exactly the safest place for you to be." "Then walk with me," Claire said softly. He hesitated only a moment before leading her away from the noise of the site, down the street to a small park nearby. They sat on a weathered bench, the city moving steadily around them. But for a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Ethan broke the silence first. "Your father is not happy about me being around." Claire let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sigh. "My father is not happy about anyone being around unless they come from his world. But I am not him. I saw the way you looked at me that night, and it was not about money or power. You saw me as a person, not a name. That is something I cannot forget." Her words unsettled him, not because they were untrue, but because they were too true. He wanted to tell her she was imagining it, that what happened was nothing more than instinct. But the truth was written in the way he remembered her hand clutching his sleeve, the way her eyes found him, even as her life slipped away. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the silver pendant. "This belongs to you." Claire's breath caught as she took it, her fingers brushing his. "You kept it?" "I thought I should give it back in person," Ethan said quietly. Claire fastened it around her neck with trembling hands, the pendant resting just above her heart. "It feels like it never left me." Ethan looked at her, struggling with words he did not know how to say. But before either of them could speak again, a sleek black car pulled up at the edge of the park. The tinted window rolled down, and Richard Caldwell's cold eyes locked onto the scene. Claire stiffened. Ethan's jaw clenched. The fragile bridge they had begun to build trembled under the weight of the world pressing in. And for the first time, Ethan realized that saving her life had been the easy part. The real test was just beginning. The sleek black car idled at the curb, its engine purring low and menacing. Richard Caldwell stepped out with the controlled precision of a man who was used to commanding entire boardrooms. His polished shoes struck the pavement with authority as his gaze swept from his daughter to Ethan. The disapproval in his eyes was unmistakable. "Claire," Richard said firmly, ignoring Ethan altogether, "you should not be here. You are not fully recovered, and you are parading yourself in public with a man you hardly know." Claire's chin lifted, her fingers brushing against the pendant that now rested at her chest. "I know enough, Father. I know that he saved my life when no one else moved." "Ugly." Richard's jaw tightened. "You are speaking like a child, not the heir to the Caldwell name. Do you have any idea what the press would do if they saw you here? The headlines alone." "I do not care about headlines," Claire cut in, her voice sharp enough to silence him. I care about the truth. And the truth is, this man risked his life for me when others stood by and watched." For a moment, Richard's mask slipped, his eyes flicking toward Ethan with something colder than disdained suspicion. "And what has he asked for in return?" "Nothing," Claire snapped. "Not money, not favors, nothing." The accusation hung in the air, stinging Ethan, even though he had braced for it. He stepped forward, his voice even but edged with steel. "You think I saved your daughter to climb into your world? I did it because she needed help. That is it." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Men like you always have motives. Do not mistake a moment of desperation for a free pass into this family." Claire turned toward Ethan, her face tight with anger and hurt. "I am sorry," she whispered, though her father stood right beside her. "You do not deserve this." Ethan shook his head. "You do not need to apologize for him." His gaze shifted to Richard. "I am not staying where I am not wanted." He walked away before Claire could stop him, his boots crunching on the gravel path. She took a step to follow, but Richard's hand closed firmly around her arm. "Enough, Claire. You are letting your emotions blind you. That man will only drag you down." Claire wrenched her arm free, her voice trembling with fury. "You are wrong. What drags me down is a world where appearances matter more than kindness." Richard's expression hardened, but Claire turned away, her eyes still searching the street where Ethan had disappeared. The line between their worlds had never felt sharper, and yet, deep in her chest, she knew she would not let it be the end. And somewhere ahead, Ethan walked with heavy steps, telling himself he would not look back. But the image of Claire's pleading eyes followed him all the same, a weight heavier than any burden he carried at the construction site. The days after the confrontation in the park grew heavier for Ethan. He threw himself into work, pushing his body harder than before, as if exhaustion could silence the memory of Claire's eyes begging him not to walk away. But nothing erased it. Every swing of the hammer, every ache in his back, carried the weight of that moment. At home, his son noticed the change. One evening, while they ate a simple dinner of pasta and bread, the boy looked up and asked, "Dad, why are you so sad? Is it because of the lady you saved?" Ethan hesitated, his fork hovering in the air. "Sometimes doing the right thing does not make life easier, buddy. Sometimes it makes it harder." His son frowned in thought, then hopped down from his chair and ran to his backpack. He pulled out a drawing and laid it on the table. It showed Ethan on the bridge again, holding the woman's hand, while a big sun shone overhead. "You told me to always do the right thing," the boy said. "And you did. That means you are a hero, even if people do not say it." The words struck Ethan deeper than he expected. He smiled faintly, ruffling his son's hair. "Maybe you are right." Meanwhile, in the Caldwell estate, the tension between Claire and her father only grew sharper. Reporters swarmed outside the gates, hungry for details about the heiress's miraculous survival. Richard spoke to them with polished words, praising the anonymous bystander who had acted with bravery. But behind closed doors, he forbade Claire from seeking Ethan again. Claire waited until the house quieted one night before slipping into her study. She unlocked her laptop and searched through local news footage. And then she found it grainy cell phone video recorded by someone on the bridge. The clip showed Ethan climbing onto the guardrail, breaking the car door open, and carrying her out as the sedan plunged into the water. Tears filled her eyes as she watched. This was proof, not just of her survival, but of his integrity. He had never once sought attention. It was the world that had ignored him. The next morning, Claire called a press conference without her father's consent. Standing before the cameras, pale but resolute, she told the story in her own words. She named Ethan Walker as her rescuer, making sure the world knew he had asked for nothing, taken nothing, and yet given everything. Across town, Ethan was eating breakfast with his son when the news report flashed on the small television in the corner of the diner. He froze as Claire's voice filled the room. "He is not just the man who saved my life," she said firmly. "He is the man who reminded me that courage and kindness still exist in this world." The diner fell silent, every patron staring at the screen. Ethan's son grinned wide, tugging at his father's sleeve. "Dad, that is you. She is talking about you." Ethan sat stunned, the coffee cooling in his hands. He had never wanted recognition, but Claire had given him something else entirely truth, spoken aloud for all to hear. And in that moment, He realized the story between them was no longer hidden in the shadows. It was unfolding in the light, for everyone to see. The press conference changed everything. Overnight, Ethan's name spread through headlines and news stations, painting him as a reluctant hero. Reporters came knocking at his small house, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, demanding his side of the story. Ethan avoided them as best as he could, keeping his son shielded from the chaos. Fame was never what he wanted. But Claire had made her choice clear. By speaking his name, she had defied her father's commands and shattered the silence that wealth tried to impose. And when Richard Caldwell confronted her later that evening, his voice sharp with fury, she stood her ground with a calmness that startled even him. "You have embarrassed this family," Richard thundered. "You stood in front of the world and tied our name to a man who has nothing." Claire lifted her chin, her pendant gleaming softly at her chest. "He has something more important than money. He has integrity. He has courage. And he has already done more for me than all your wealth ever could." Richard stared at her, his silence heavy. For the first time, his daughter's words left him with no rebuttal. A few days later, Claire arrived quietly at Ethan's modest home. He opened the door with hesitation, his son peeking curiously from behind his leg. She looked at him not as an heiress visiting another world, but as a woman seeking the man who had changed hers. "You should not be here," Ethan said softly, though his voice lacked conviction. "I had to be," Claire replied. "You saved my life, Ethan. But you also reminded me what life is supposed to be about. I will not let fear or pride stand in the way of that." For a long moment, Ethan simply looked at her, searching for the truth in her words. Then his son broke the silence, stepping forward with innocent boldness. "Are you going to stay for dinner?" Claire smiled, her eyes glistening as she crouched to meet the boy's gaze. "If your dad wants me to, I would love to." Ethan's chest tightened. He glanced between his son's hopeful face and Claire's unwavering eyes. Slowly, he nodded. That evening, around a simple table with mismatched chairs, laughter rose in a house that had not heard it in too long. For the first time, the weight Ethan carried felt lighter, as if kindness had carved out a place for hope. Outside, the world still buzzed with judgment and curiosity, but inside, a quiet truth had taken root. Love was not about status. Justice was not about headlines. It was about choosing courage over fear and authenticity over pretense. And as Ethan watched Claire gently braid his son's hair while the boy told her stories about school, he realized something with certainty. Saving her had been an act of instinct, but standing beside her now, this was the beginning of a life worth fighting for. The man who had once thought himself invisible had been seen. The woman who had been trapped by privilege had found her freedom. And together, they proved that true love and true leadership were built not on power or money, but on action, integrity, and the courage to stand against the world.